Well, hello and welcome to this special mini Innovation Forum webinar where we'll be talking about commodity sourcing resilience and the impacts of climate change. I'm Ian Welsh and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes or so. Climate-related disruptions have stark financial implications for businesses. Last year alone, global climate-related economic losses reached a staggering $380 billion, with over 20% directly impacting agriculture, according to Swiss Re. For companies sourcing climate-sensitive commodities, the stakes are clear. Extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and shifting land use patterns directly threaten both supply security and carbon reduction goals. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm delighted I'm joined today by Charlotte Just, who's Head of Impact and Sustainability at Lily's Kitchen. Now, I'll turn to Charlotte shortly, but we do want to hear from you all. So please do be thinking about points and questions that you'd like me to put to Charlotte and write them into the Q&A box on your Zoom window. Please note your name and organisation when putting your questions. You can, of course, up-like others' questions by clicking on the thumbs up, and the more likes, the greater the chances that I will put that question to Charlotte. We are recording the webinar, and we'll share the recordings with everybody in due course. Okay, well, welcome, Charlotte. Why don't you start by giving us a very quick introduction to the work of Lily's Kitchen?
Perfect. Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm Charlotte. I'm Head of Impact and Sustainability for Lily's Kitchen. I've been here nearly a year and a half now, and prior to that, I was at Ella's Kitchen, the baby food brand. So Lily's are a natural premium pet food brand. We have a UK office in London, but our product is sold around the world. And predominantly my role looks after our sustainability strategy, which focuses on B Corp, carbon and sourcing as our kind of top priorities.
Thank you very much. So where are your main supply chain environmental impacts then?
So when I joined, Lily's Kitchen had measured our 2022 carbon footprint, and that gave us some really good insight as to where our emissions were. So 99.97% of our emissions sit within scope 3. Of that, about 51% are ingredients and 36% is packaging. So I already knew when we joined that those were going to be our key focus areas. It's all sat within our product. So we need to, focus on scope 3 and look at our portfolio basically to make sure that we grow in a sustainable way for the future.
And what in particular then, in terms of your scope 3, where are your primary commodity impacts?
So we've now started measuring, or we've just finished measuring our 2023 and our 2024 carbon footprints. One of the things that I wanted to make sure we do is measure it in the right way. So we've been following methodology from guidance through the Science Based Targets initiative. So the idea being we've now finished those carbon footprints. So we've kind of caught back up to date from our 2022 one, made sure we measured it in the right way. And in the next 2 weeks, hopefully, we are going to be able to map out our short and long-term carbon targets. The idea being that will give us a really good indication within our ingredients and within packaging what are going to be the key hotspots that we need to focus on for the future, really. Both kind of those projects that we can start next year and projects that are going to take that little bit longer into the future. But once we've set those targets and kind of looked at our reduction plan, the idea is that we will then get those targets validated through the Science Based Targets initiative to make sure that we're doing everything properly and in line with guidance of obviously the Paris Agreement and making sure that we stick to the 1.5.
And as a premium pet brand, I'd imagine your primary commodity impact will be in meat. Yes, is that right?
Yeah, so it's out of we kind of did a piece of work and mapped out kind of, by volume of ingredients where we're having the biggest impact. So our meat does take up a lot of that. So we know that it's probably not going to be as simple as just saying, okay, we're just going to cut all of the meat out of our products completely in order to hit our carbon targets. There's lots of factors that are going to be involved in this. We have decided to prioritize 3 different ingredients first, and then we'll move through, we use a lot of ingredients across our portfolio range, and we're not going to be able to tackle all of them at once. So the piece of work we did was also to say, okay, where do we need to start? We know that meat is going to be a high area of focus. So we're going to focus on chicken, beef, and fish. Chicken, from the point of view of from a volume point of view, that is a very high volume ingredient that we use within our products. Beef, from an environmental point of view and a carbon point of view, and then fish, interestingly, is not an ingredient that we use much of, but it's something that we know is important to consumers and we get asked about. So we've also made that a priority for us. So yes, that will be.
Okay, thank you. So how do you go about measuring your environmental impacts then?
So as I talked about, the one area is carbon. So we obviously want to make sure that we're measuring our carbon in a really robust way, make sure it's in line with the right methodology and that we're following and doing everything in the right way there. But obviously that is just carbon. There's lots of other things to think about. So we are a certified B Corp as well, Lily's Kitchen. We have been since 2015. So we're approaching the 10-year mark of being a certified B Corp. I'm extremely passionate about B Corp and believe it's the way all businesses should run. And for those of you on the call who might know, B Corp have launched a new set of standards this year. So they came out in April to really raise the bar for businesses and B Corps everywhere. And the reason they've done that is to kind of to keep up with the evolving challenges that we're facing globally when it comes to climate change, and everything is constantly changing. Businesses need to do more. We need to take more responsibility. So the focus on environmental stewardship and climate has increased hugely with these standards. And as well as focusing on carbon, another piece of work that we're going to need to do is an assessment on our impact across the environment. So it's not just going to be carbon. So effectively, it's looking at the 5 key drivers of nature change. So it includes things like pollution, your impact on living organisms, your impact on biodiversity, and it will look across the entire range so that you can have a much more holistic view of your impact on the environment, which for us will obviously include our packaging and our ingredients. That will all be through our co-manufacturers, and yeah, part of that commitment as a B Corp is then, once you've measured that, is then setting targets on how you measure and reduce your impact across all of those different areas. So it's really raised the bar, and it'll be really exciting and really interesting to see what that looks like.
Thank you, and thanks also to our first questioners. Please do be thinking about your questions and put them in the Q&A box, and we'll be coming to them shortly. So, Charlotte, you mentioned just now that you work with co-manufacturer suppliers who make your products. How do you work with them to understand your full Scope 3 emissions?
So this has been, it's been really interesting. So we work with, we kind of have approximately 12 key co-manufacturers that we buy finished goods from. So we don't have direct relationships with our the ingredient suppliers and those farmers. We have the relationship is held with our co-manufacturers. So we need to kind of peel it back layer by layer, almost like an onion. This is the first layer. So it's about building the relationships with our co-manufacturers. So one thing we started off by doing last year is we introduced quarterly meetings with our key co-manufacturers. So where we're having the most impact, it was to introduce quarterly meetings, and those meetings covered supply chain, quality, and sustainability. So at the beginning of the year, we kind of set precedent that these are the things we're going to cover. We're going to set targets under each area. And for a lot of them, and for us, this was the first time we had such a big focus on sustainability, to look at what they were doing, initiatives they were running, how they were measuring their impact, and setting reduction targets. So the initial starting point was we asked them all to measure their energy waste and water on those sites, so their site metrics, set reduction targets if they've got those. And that was kind of the first starting point. And I think these quarterly meetings will now start to really evolve, and they're only going to get bigger, because the more we understand about our impact, especially when it comes to our products, means that the more data we're going to need from them, the more that relationship is going to need to we're going to need to leverage those relationships to reduce our own impact, because ultimately it's going to need to go down the chain. So they've been great, really good.
Great, thank you. Let's come back to that relationship a bit in a sec. But
yeah.
I'm interested in how climate change is impacting your ultimate sourcing locations. How much do you know about that? And again, what have you done to work with your manufacturers to ascertain that?
Yes. So part of, as I mentioned in the strategy, we've got obviously a focus on B Corp, big focus on carbon, but the other one is responsible sourcing. So this is kind of where the location piece comes in. So when I joined last year as well, we kind of held a big internal workshop at Lily's, which was brilliant. And it was basically to get a cross-functional team from across the business to define what responsible sourcing means to us. So if we're going to set some targets around sourcing and what responsible sourcing means, we need to understand and agree as a business what that means and what it means specifically for Lily's. So that workshop included bringing together information on what are all the standards out there when it comes to human rights and animal welfare, and how we get traceability, and what are the certifications we've got options for, what are we doing already, what have we done in the past, what are other brands doing. So that it was a kind of huge gathering information, and then it was basically filtering it back down to be like, okay, what's important to us as a business. And we came up with five key areas that's formed part of the basis of our responsible sourcing strategy, which are proper food, transparency, environmental impact, animal welfare, and human rights. So that's the basis of the strategy. And obviously that transparency piece, that's all focused on basically gaining a greater level of understanding about where our ingredients are coming from. And as I said earlier about the onion analogy, it's kind of moving down the supply chain through our co-manufacturers to kind of tier 1, 2, 3 suppliers to get much more visibility on all of our ingredients. But obviously that's an enormous spider's web. But that's why we need to prioritize some ingredients first. But that traceability piece is very important to us. And again, that will come down to the relationship with those co-manufacturers and working closely with them to get that visibility, so that we can then have influence further down the chain.
And are your suppliers happy to provide that visibility?
It's a mix. I'm not going to lie. It's a mix. So when we started speaking with suppliers around sustainability last year, there was an enormous disparity between what they were doing. So you had suppliers up here who were already measuring their carbon footprint, set reduction targets, doing everything in line with SBTi, already got the data, good to share, happy to do it, understand the impacts, understand the why. And then you had suppliers right down here who had never even considered measuring the water that they use on their site. So there was a big job to be done last year about kind of leveling up a lot of those suppliers, and making sure that we could get that initial data in the right way from all of them, and make sure that they understand why we want it and the impact it's having. So it's at the beginning of the year, as I said, there was a huge difference between who could measure what, so therefore what targets we could set, and some of it was a real struggle. But there was, if I think of one supplier in particular as a really good example, we started the year where they had no way of measuring any of those site metrics at all, so therefore couldn't set targets. They also had no resource. Lots of these suppliers don't have specific sustainability resource, as many businesses don't. So a lot of these people were doing it on the side of their jobs. But fast forward a year and a half later, they've now got 2 full-time employees dedicated to sustainability. They're measuring all their metrics, and now they're looking at measuring their carbon footprint. And you just think, if one business can have that kind of impact on a supplier that then kind of trickles down the chain, the impact could be huge. So it's really, we're seeing it's really positive. We've seen lots of step forwards, and lots of positive footsteps that they're making on sustainability. But it's just the relationship has been key, and I think spending one-on-one time with them as well, me and whoever that person is, to go through our strategy, them share their strategy, talk about why we're doing it and where the synergies are. That's also been like a key part of it, enabling us to do a lot of this work.
So how do you leverage your suppliers to work with you then? And thinking in terms of your impact lowering initiatives, and what sort of the key things that get them to come with you?
I think, again, it's like the collaboration piece, and understanding what they're doing and their kind of strategy and potentially their goals with sustainability has been really important for us to then say, well, actually, this is what we're doing as well. And they're on the same, they match up, and we can knit them together and we can work on this together. So the relationships that I've built over the year have meant that it's improved as time's gone on, and now gathering data from them is getting easier and easier as the months go on, because it's they're doing more, so it's easier for them to just fling over some information to us, because they're already doing it, rather than them having to measure their impacts specifically for Lily's Kitchen, which, let's face it, we're one of probably many customers they have. They're doing it for them, and they're also the increased their other customers are now asking and making these requests for sustainability data as well. And that is, we are seeing an increase in that, which helps, because I'm not the only person bugging them for site metrics and other things. It's coming from other customers, and that's only going to increase. So they know that, something needs to be done. So it's been really interesting.
And how do you avoid this sort of fatigue element? I mean, audit fatigue is something that's been around for, something we've been talking about for a long time, but it obviously comes about when a number of customers are asking for different things or slightly different bits of data. I mean, how have you gone about ensuring that that's another challenge for your suppliers?
Yes. So one thing I did know is that when we started at the beginning of last year, there was a template created, again, based on kind of site metrics, but it was our own template that we put together to be like, okay, this is probably the easiest way we can manage it, and started to get them to fill it in. Obviously, they were saying that they get these requests from other people as well with their own templates, again, and they're being audited on things like quality. They're also managing their supply chain. There's lots of things for them to be managing. So another reason for us to move to SBTI methodology is that for those who were already following that, it means that it's so much simpler, because it's in exactly the same format, exactly the same template. So that's a really good, and again, another good reason why that's a good methodology to follow. But also it's meant that with a bit more explanation from my side around SBTI and why it's good to follow that methodology and use that template, it means that they can also have a bit of influence on other customers to say, well, actually, this is the template we're following, and kind of passing it on. So it's trying to work with them on, I've always said I don't want to make it more complicated for them. So how do we make it easier? And also, how do we set reduction targets that are also working towards your sustainability goals, not just ours? So rather than them giving us all of this information and targets that are just for us, and then you've got a separate list for every single customer, it's like, what is their strategy? Do these KPIs, are they also kind of working towards what they're trying to achieve, to try and simplify it all, I guess, and not overcomplicate things?
Sure. So what are the drivers for you then at Lily's Kitchen to engage with your supply chain and tackle the impacts of a changing climate and get to grips with it all? What drives the internal drivers?
I think there's two things to mention. Probably if we take a step back from even supply chain at the minute, like climate change is the biggest challenge we're facing globally. So everyone in the sustainability space knows that it's a huge challenge, and that it's not something that we can just sit around and wait for government to make all of the changes. It's businesses have got to step up and take responsibility. So there's an element of, we know we've got to lower our impact if we want a business that's going to be sustainable for the future, and a product portfolio that's sustainable for the future, because at this rate there won't be a supply chain to create our products. So we've got to grow sustainably. And the other massive driver for us is our commitment as a B Corp. So in the UK at the moment, any business has a legal duty to prioritise profit for shareholders. That's kind of what's sat in your articles of association from a legal point of view. But when you certify as a B Corp, you change that commitment to say that you will prioritise profit for shareholders, but it will be alongside people and the planet. So it effectively gives your CEO, your leadership team, the autonomy to consider all of these things when they're making business decisions. So it's not just profit driven. It's okay, if we do this as a business, we also need to think about the impact on our supply chain, the impact on our workers, the impact on the impact on the environment, whatever it might be. All of those things get wrapped up into that decision. It's not just thinking about profit. So there's a huge driver that we believe that that is the right way to do business. It's the responsible way to do business. And we're seeing that B Corp movement grow, and are huge advocates of that, and a very engaged member of the B Corp community, I guess. So that's really important.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks to those of you that put questions into the Q&A box. Let's turn to some of them now. Most popular questions, looking at plant-based animal or pet food. Pet food. So can you give us some thoughts as to how plant-based proteins could be used to produce more climate-friendly, potentially, pet food?
Yes, so this is kind of open question at the moment, I guess. So yes, there is an option that we could move to a more plant-based portfolio range. There's also lots of talk at the moment and all of this research going on around using insects in pet food. I think there has been a lot of discussion around this, and although we haven't looked into it in great depth at the moment, it's kind of, I guess, one thing to flag is that the Lily's Kitchen brand was built on the importance of pets being part of the family, and the idea was that whatever, our founder started making food in her kitchen, so the idea is that you were kind of creating home cooked meals. Whatever you would cook for your family, it would then just, that's what you're feeding your pets. So the insect piece is quite interesting and quite controversial and quite an emotional one, because actually for us as a brand, it doesn't quite seem like the right fit, because actually that's not what we would provide to our family, that we would then kind of give to the dog or the cat as well. But there is that element about going more plant-based. For us, I think it will be a case of looking at our portfolio in totality and reducing where we use meat across the board, rather than just cutting things out or necessarily moving straight across to a plant-based range. We still, I think it will be about looking at the whole portfolio and reducing meat across the board. Because we know that, for our consumers at the moment, it's still a very important part of what they feel they should be feeding their pets. So it would be a big shift in a mindset, I think, for our particular consumer base and what they do. But I think this will all come out from once we've got those carbon targets and we start looking at ingredients in more detail. I think that's going to give us quite a clear steer on what we're going to need to do, and it will be moving. Yeah, we will be kind of decreasing the amount of meat we use.
Okay, thank you. Got a question about, moving on the consumer point, question asking around in terms of when you're thinking about your scope 3 and your emissions, should you be embedding consumer end emissions in that and thinking about it?
That is a good question. It's something we have been talking about. I think getting the data for that at that level is incredibly difficult, to try and get the most accurate data that you can of like how your consumers are using your products and what impact that's having. But yes, the whole theory around our carbon footprint is that we will, we've measured it in as much detail as we can for this time. And what we'll do is review it year on year, and we will try to aim to get more primary data every time we do it, and put processes and practices in place so that we can get a more accurate footprint as time goes on. In which case that might be one element that we choose to try and get hold of more data on.
Thinking about consumers, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, what do they ask you to prioritize?
So I guess knowing what I knew from, again, both Ella's Kitchen and from Lily's, which is quite interesting, is that most consumers care, number one, about recycling. I feel like that's a very tangible element of sustainability, that, it's the consumer is purchasing it in the supermarket, taking it home, it sits in their cupboard, and then them being able to recycle it is a very, that's a part that a consumer can play in doing their bit and feeling like they're, being responsible and recycling that part of your product. I think carbon is a lot more difficult to comprehend and communicate, but the recyclability of our products is a very easy thing to share and an easy thing for them to do. So recyclability is a big priority. And we've also noticed that fish is another one that we get asked a lot around. And although it's not big volume wise, as I was saying earlier, we've made it a priority as one of our ingredients, because we get asked a lot about what we're doing on fish and what our strategy is and what we're doing for the future, and can we provide more detail around where our fish comes from. So we know that that's, as well as thinking about carbon and what, volumes and what's important to us, we do also want to make sure that if our consumers care about that, then, we need to make sure that we prioritize it. So
I guess there must be an element of frustration in that your consumers ask you to look at one thing when actually, well, you should be asking us about this thing because it's a greater impact.
Yeah, I think that's why it came down to, when we came down to prioritizing our first kind of top 3 ingredients, it's like, okay, from my side, I want to know where we're having the most impact. So, from a volume point of view and from a, meat point of view, for example, carbon point of view, I know these 2 ingredients are going to be big. So chicken and beef, and actually our consumers care about this. So why don't we, it's not that it's the top 3 volume wise, but it's thinking about all of those different elements. And yeah, let's prioritize something that they care about and they ask us about, so we can be transparent with them.
Question we've got from our audience on credibility and the role of independent assessment and certification. What's Village Kitchen's view on that?
As in kind of what's our stances, do you mean?
What certification or independent assessment of all of these matters do you use?
So this is where B Corp comes in. That's kind of, so obviously there's so many certifications that you can achieve out there. Hugely appreciate that. One of the reasons we choose B Corp and believe B Corp is the right way to go is because it's a very holistic certification on every area of your business. So it's kind of your governance, your workers, your supply chain, the environment, your impact on the community. It's the whole lot. It's not just one element. At the moment, the old B Corp standards, which we're kind of currently on, are verified by B Lab themselves. But with the new standards that have been published this year, those will be verified by a third party. So they will be even more robust than they have been. And it's a good step forwards, an interesting step forwards, but that's the certification that we believe is the best. It's kind of the highest social and environmental set of standards out there. So if we can continue to drive B Corp and that movement forwards, then it kind of in turn raises the bar for other businesses as well.
Okay, thank you. Question around supplier segmentation, asking, when you are thinking about engaging with your suppliers, do you segment them in terms of commercial dependency on them, and both ways for you and Lily's and the supplier, and then also in terms of how mature the supplier is. So you talked about this a little bit, but give a bit more information, please, on how you segment your supply chain when you're thinking about engaging with them in these issues.
So as in how we segment them with the kind of like the quarterly meetings and our...
Yeah, just in terms of your approach to them, do you put them into particular buckets?
So we've got, I guess, within those 12 co-manufacturers that I talked about, 2 of them probably are like our biggest co-manufacturers and predominantly produce most of our portfolio. So I definitely kind of prioritize those 2 and have much more communication with those 2 than the others. But it's we obviously source product from all of them. All of them are a key part of our carbon footprint. So it's, there's a couple of co-manufacturers that we don't yet have those quarterly meetings with, but just from a volume point of view are so small at the moment, or we might have just started working with them, or we're only doing a few trials with them. We don't yet have those kind of quarterly meetings, but those 12 co-manufacturers are where like 99% of our product are coming from. So we decided to have quarterly meetings with all 12 to make sure that we can get as much visibility as possible. So we have kind of prioritized all of them, if you like. But in particular, we know that kind of 70% of our product comes from 2. So I, in particular, have made much more effort to have kind of separate one-to-ones with those suppliers to gain just more understanding of what their priorities are and how we can leverage the relationship a bit more, in our favor, so that we can have more of an impact as well.
Okay, I think we are coming towards the end. Charlotte, what's next then for Lily's Kitchen? What are you looking at and prioritizing next?
So for us, it's our carbon targets. So I'm really excited about the next few weeks. We should, in theory, be able to map out our short-term and long-term targets, and in theory, then validate those through the SBTI methodology, or through the SBTI, sorry. That will form the basis of pretty much every project, because if we're going to focus particularly on ingredients and packaging, having those carbon targets is crucial, because it will then effectively map out what we need to do across the board. And that's when we'll then get other teams involved to understand kind of what knock-on effect that has to the future of the company, what our portfolio looks like going forwards, the shelf life of our products, the taste, etc., and what that looks like from a branding point of view. So there's lots to come from that. And then the new B Corp standards is something that is a huge priority. So as I said, those launched this April. We are actually going to have to certify on those next year. So the product that we're kicking off, or the project that we're kicking off in the next few weeks, is basically going to be to start to certify on those new standards, which are going to be tougher, but really exciting. And I think there's lots to do and keep me busy with. But yeah, the new B Corp standards and our carbon targets are a priority for us as a next step.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks very much to everyone for their questions. I'll make sure that they're all shared with Charlotte. Some of you asked about getting in touch. What we'll do is, if both sides agree to sharing of details, we will share them. But obviously, both sides have to agree before details can be shared. Okay, well, look, that's it for the conversation. We are running out of time. My thanks to Charlotte very much for her insight today. As I said, to all of you for your questions. Thanks also to Innovation Forum's Anamia and Nurag for arranging today's webinar. We'll be continuing the conversations at the Sustainable Commodities and Landscapes Forum in Amsterdam on the 20th and 21st of October. And now's a great time to register, as there is currently a €200 discount and 2-day passes if they're confirmed before close on 12th September next week. For more information, do contact Anamia. There's also a special exclusive webinar listeners discount of a further 20% using the code webinar20. That's webinar all caps 20 in numerals, and that's in the chat box right now if you want to get that code. We'll be in touch with the webinar recordings in due course for you to share and listen again to. But for now, I hope you found the last half hour interesting and useful. I'm Ian Welsh. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.